Of the district-wide boundary review advisory committee for Portland Public Schools. So I wanted to just cover a little bit of business before we go ahead and get into the substance of the meeting. So again, my name is Jason Tremblay. I am one of the co-chairs for the committee. While I am the co-chair, I'm also going to be an active member as well. So I think for a lot of the meetings tonight and going forward, is Jim Jacks is going to be our meeting facilitator. They'll help us shepherd through the process that we've got embedded in each of these meetings to make sure that what we hope to achieve for every meeting going forward, we actually meet those objectives. And our additional staff support is Judy Brennan, who's going to give us some presentations tonight. So again, this is part 2 of our orientation, getting a sense of what the lay of the land is. Judy will provide a series of PowerPoint presentations to get us an understanding of where the system currently is and then introduce us to the hotspot schools that we're going to be focusing on in the next series of meetings that are both in December and January. One small point of business that I just wanted to clarify for everybody is that Nisha Saxena, who you all met last week or 2 weeks ago as the other committee co-chair, has chosen to step down from that position, but she will stay on as one of Carol Smith's.
No, I just got super busy at work and my kiddo is starting high school and we were interim anyways, so I decided to be like extremely interim.
So for now she's leaving me solo, but Carol Smith is gonna.
I feel like I've done this to you before, Jason.
Yes, you have at the Housing Bureau, Nisha, so I'm used to this. So the superintendent is working through a process right now to figure out who that additional co-chair will be, and once that we know who that is, she'll let us know as soon as she makes that decision. Additionally, for members of the public, you'll see in the agenda towards the end of the meeting that we do have space for a 10-minute public comment period. There are yellow cards that you can fill out in the back and submit to Jim. And then depending on the amount of comment cards that we have submitted, we'll hopefully be able to make space where we can actually make some remarks or submit materials to the committee as well. In addition, members of the public have gotten access to it in the back, but also in your red folders, there's a series of documents that'll be for tonight's meeting that we'll go through over the course. But one of the things that's also in there is that we have kind of draft meeting notes or meeting minutes from what we talked about last week. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we have that record for everyone's awareness. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim to move forward with the next part of the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Jim Jacks. Before I plunge into things, the video camera is the PPS staff. One of the school board members requested that this meeting get recorded. So that explains the camera. And what we want to do is go briefly around the committee and then around staff and the public. And one of the things that we're struggling with is we have a fairly compressed amount of time before this body needs to make some recommendations to the superintendent. And as a large group facilitator, I like lots of time around people getting to know each other on the committee, but we don't have that much time together to really do that in the in-depth way that I prefer. But a lot of you have a lot of expertise and skills and knowledge, which is why you're on the committee. And so what we want to do is go around and say your name and your organization and the last foreign country you visited, not when, just where. And if you haven't been to a foreign country, the last state besides Oregon and Washington that you visited. So Jim Jacks, last foreign country, Canada.
Judy Brennan, British Columbia, Canada.
Nisha Saxena and Portugal.
Michael Reinert, and I think it would be the Netherlands.
Hector Roche, I'm Senior Equity Manager here, and it might have been Scotland.
Kendall Wilson in Mexico.
Jason Tremblay from Sackett, and the last country I visited was Palau in the South Pacific.
Scott Bailey, Mexico.
Michelle Arntz, I'm a PTA representative, and Canada. Is that another country?
They think so.
Kim Wilson, a PBS teacher, and I was named by PAT, Mexico.
Sarah Lewis, principal of Roseway Heights, France.
Tony Magliano, Chief Operating Officer, Iraq.
Sasha Perrin, Senior Director, Office of School Performance, Costa Rica.
Margaret Calvert, I'm the principal at Jefferson and one of the PAPSA representatives. And being a former Canadian dual citizen, yes, it's a different country. I don't know if it's foreign, but different. And Canada would be it as well.
Max Tuttle, Super Sat, Mexico.
And
Steve Finger, Mexico.
Brian Robertson, Slovenia.
Janet Whitley, support staff to Judy, Sweden. Cynthia Moon, Mexico.
Jason Wells, the Netherlands.
Heather Leak, PTA, and Bahamas.
James Robertson, just a dad, 6-year-old, don't get to travel internationally.
Gretchen Holland, Facilities, Switzerland.
Terry Brady, Transportation, Mexico.
Sean Helm, Data Policy Analysis, Canada.
Ben LeBlanc, here's a parent, Canada.
Gary Pearson, Director of Special Education, Nova Scotia, Canada.
Sarah King, Facilities, Costa Rica.
Dave Porter, Germany.
Mark Van Homsen, Austria.
that is everyone, I believe. So.
Just a point of clarification, I am not a dual citizen, but my parents were Canadian, so.
My husband's a dual citizen.
My husband is a Canadian.
Thank you.
My husband is Canadian and
My best friends are
All right, thank you for sharing a teaser about your life outside of work and outside of this committee. We're looking for different ways for you to connect with each other, and that is part of why the different seating arrangement than last time. So there will be different times during the meeting this evening where you might be turning to your neighbor to chat a little bit about different things that come up. So hopefully you're not sitting right next to someone you sat next to at the last meeting. If you are, that's okay, but at the next meeting we'll try harder to have you guys mix around together. So let's move to the next agenda item, and there's several topics to cover pretty briskly. And what we're really looking for is a shared understanding among the committees so that we can move forward together. And there's a couple of different topics. The first one, and this is in your red packet, these are the results of the sticky notes that you turned in at the end of the last meeting. And as you recall, the question is, what is preventing you at that moment in time from making a recommendation to the superintendent around boundaries? And this is, everybody wrote a bunch of sticky notes. These are the answers, and it was hugely helpful in those of us putting together the agenda for this meeting and for the next 4 meetings, trying to anticipate that. So this is, in effect, the to-do list for this committee. And we'll ask that question occasionally as we move forward in these meetings, just so that we stay on track, because at the end of the day, this group will need to make some decisions about what sort of advice you'd like to give the superintendent. And this is a key tool that can help make sure that we as staff put you in a position to succeed as a committee.
Can I make a quick note on that?
Judy.
Janet did a great job of typing up your notes, but if you see something here that wasn't written the way you meant it to, if you just want to make a note and get it back to her, she'd be happy to. And when she dropped this off and I looked at it the first time, I saw this page and I was like, oh, we got this. And then I turned the page over. I thought it was only one-sided. But these are all great things for us to help.
So, and hopefully a lot of the material tonight will take care of a lot of this input. So second thing is, on your agenda you've got the charge of the committee from the superintendent, and from a scope point of view, we're starting to narrow things a little bit. And for these first 6 meetings, it is not the goal to make recommendations on all the boundary changes for all the schools in all the district, whether they should or shouldn't. That is for the committee's future work that'll start later in the spring. What we're really aimed at right now is not the entire list of overcrowded schools. Right now we're focusing on a couple of schools, and you'll be hearing a lot more about those from Judy as we move forward tonight. So another handout, third topic here is in your packet what the next 4 meetings may look like. So based on your sticky notes and conversations that we've had, based on what we know right now, this is what the next 4 meetings could look like. And again, this is a roadmap based on what we know now, and it will evolve and change as the committee moves forward in its work. But we wanted to give you a sense of sort of what's coming, or what we, peeking over the horizon, believe is coming. So you'll see on December 3rd, it's a deep dive into Beverly Cleary. There'll be some level of staff presentation. And we're suggesting that the group invite a couple of people to speak briefly and present to it. And we're also assuming there'd be a pretty significant amount of public comment time at the meeting. And then as a group, you would have a lot of discussion and reflection on the topics from December 3rd. December 11th is looking like a very similar structure, only the deep dive is into Chapman Elementary. And again, that is aimed at putting you in a position to make some decisions on recommendations. So the January 7th meeting, Judy?
I just wanted to, maybe you said this and I didn't hear it, but we are planning for those 2 meetings to be in school locations.
Oh, I didn't say that, you're right, yeah.
The meeting December 3rd, the meeting December 11th. We want to give you a chance to get as close to these schools as possible, and so that the community doesn't have to come to you, have you go to the community. So the location is to be determined, because Beverly Cleary is a multi-campus school, but it'll likely be at one of the Beverly Cleary campuses, and then the Chapman one will likely be at Chapman. Depending on how things go, we can arrange for a tour in advance if you have the time. That would be difficult for Beverly Cleary, but keep that in mind. You'll get more information about specific location. Thank you.
No, that clarified a lot. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that. So the first meeting in January, we would have, based on the committee discussion of December 3rd and 7th, we would start to have some sort of recommendation list or scenarios, or who knows what the heck it'll look like. But there'll be something to respond to and to dig into. And you guys will need to have a lot of time to discuss things, and we'll be refining things. And then the January 22nd meeting is really about kind of finalizing your draft recommendations for the superintendent. So it may look fast to you. The key is, and we'll ask again later tonight, about what kind of information you're needing. So you'll have a chance to learn a lot in the next hour and a half, and I'm sure some of you will want to learn more. And this is where be proactive in telling Judy and myself what you need as a committee member to feel comfortable in making recommendations and decisions. So again, this is a draft. This is based on what we know now. I am confident it will change and evolve, but this is a good snapshot for how things may play out moving forward. Question?
Excuse my ignorance, and I've been rolling this around in my head all week, trying to wrap my head around it, but I get the idea of Beverly Cleary and Chapman being kind of emergency situations because of the overcrowding, but I don't understand how we can do that and not affect other schools. So why aren't we doing everything all at once? Because I thought there was a
So-
plan, like for Beverly Cleary, I
So-
thought there was a temporary plan.
Yes, there is. And so, what we are asking is whether there's a strategic ability to do something at a boundary change level now that doesn't undo everything else and that better meets the needs of those schools. It's a really specific question about those schools that involves boundaries. And by the end of tonight, you may have a better sense of how that fits in. I hope you do.
Okay.
It's a really important question, and it's one that you will have to weigh as you move forward. You're not required to recommend a boundary change for those schools.
Okay.
That wasn't the deal.
All right.
It's a feasibility question as much as anything else because there's the bigger change that's coming.
Okay, thank you.
Other, Tony?
Yeah, mine's much simpler. Is there significance to the color scheme on this?
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing.
The colors are some rough groupings of the comments
I feel like I'm looking at a data
So
wall.
similar comments are colored
similarly.
Well, and that was my interpretation, so if you really do one in a different place, go ahead.
So, Scott?
I just want to say, after watching boundary processes for the last couple of years, I just remain skeptical that a group new to the information can go in after one meeting and come up with anything that the people in those communities don't know or that staff doesn't know. And I don't get why we could add any value to the process. I just want to lay that out there. And I'd much rather, now I don't get why the school communities aren't part of this. I'd much rather start in on the district-wide thing now. But maybe you can convince me. But I feel like we're gonna, I don't know what we're gonna get out of this except for going a month or two and we might learn some stuff, but I don't think like we feel like we can add anything to the process.
And that is a possible outcome. And as, I mean, this is where, as a large group facilitator, my responsibility is to help you guys make some intentional decisions. And the result of your decision could be, we don't think we should do anything right now. So that is a possible outcome. And part of, one of the values of collaboration is that you get a whole lot of brains thinking about something with access to a whole lot of networks and access to a lot of information. And sometimes the synergy of that leads to unanticipated or impossible to anticipate results. So in a certain sense, collaborative processes are a leap of faith. It's a valid question, it's a valid concern.
We had really smart people in the Jefferson cluster. We had really smart people around the Alameda process. We have really smart people in the Beverly Cleary process, a couple of whom are in this room right now, who've been working years on this. But
So to the extent that you've chosen to participate, if that's healthy skepticism, and I appreciate, we appreciate raising it, putting it out there. It's probably shared by others. There may be others who are new to it and are trying to learn to get up to speed as well. So our goal was to see if we could move the information forward to bring about your involvement in an important decision that needs to be made right now about what to do with two really overcrowded schools. And there's an opportunity for you to do that. And that's all that this is about at this point.
Oh, I was just, to kind of piggyback on what Scott was saying, when we were involved with the Alameda process, and then I very closely watched the Jefferson process, one of the things we discovered was that to do that locally, as a local process, it was really hard to identify which schools, I mean, every time we tried to think like, okay, it's just impacting these two schools. No, it's really 3. No, it's really 4. Well, actually, it's 6. And then it just, and we didn't quite get there in the Alameda process, but at the Jefferson process, it became very clear that it was just so hard to do that locally, and it needed to be district-wide. And I understand that there's hotspots and they need to be dealt with right away, but just to be mindful of the fact that when we dig into this, we'll realize that there's probably like 5 or 6 other schools in each of these hotspots that will be impacted, as both Kim and Scott were saying, and especially with Beverly Cleary, where you've got 3 campuses kind of spread out over a, I don't know, 3 or 4 mile area.
Definitely. Yeah, if this, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't wanna take a lot of time, but since we talked about this, I looked through it, there are a couple of things I wrote down that I don't even see on here.
Okay, let Janet know.
One of which is that I feel like we can't really do the district-wide boundary review without knowing what the enrollment and transfer policy is. And we won't know that until after January anyway,
Right.
so we need to wait. I feel like I need to wait, I don't know, whatever. I would think you would agree with that, like, that we have to know what that policy is. You gave us a lot of policies, that was not one of them. So I view this as like practice and waiting, and that's fine with me, but I do agree that you're not gonna get necessarily expertise opinion from me.
Can I clarify something? I wanna make sure that I understood what you said, Judy.
Mhm.
I understood in response to, Scott, that you were basically saying a decision is going to be made on this, we're inviting you to be part of it.
A decision on how Beverly, Cleary, and Chapman will cope with overcrowding next year needs to be made.
Okay, so the
And there's
decision
a-
is going to be made,
Yes.
you're inviting us to be part of it.
Yes, ma'am. And before the end of tonight, you should be more acquainted with the type of options that we're looking at for a range of schools so that you can see where boundary change has the potential or not, and the scope of changes that PPS looks at in these kinds of situations.
So it is kind of a learning thing, because regardless of what we do, a decision is going to be made. Okay, thanks.
But that decision still could be nothing.
I doubt that do nothing, well, the only reason we've invited you to be a part of this is that do nothing is not really an option for those schools and several others. And I feel like you're really ready to dive in. We just have a little bit
Yeah.
more to do, and then,
Yeah.
then we'll get there. Some important things to do.
Definitely. So, 2 other, and I still am not late, so that's good. Couple other pieces in your packet. One thing from a decision, how this group makes decisions. We haven't talked about that yet. And my suggestion is to operate under a consensus model for the next few meetings, or certainly for the rest of this evening. And then, how the committee chooses to make chooses kind of a final decision on the recommendation that you send to the superintendent. That could look like a lot of different things. You could do it by consensus, you could do it by voting, and if you're gonna vote, is it simple majority, super majority? So there's a lot of choices there about your ultimate decision. So my suggestion is that we have a couple of volunteers get together and meet once and make, and talk through the pros and cons of those choices, and then bring that back to the larger committee about how you make your final decisions. But I think for our purposes, for the next few meetings, doing a consensus model is probably going to serve the group well. So does anybody strongly opposed or objecting to the group using a consensus model for the next couple of meetings? Okay. Is there are there 1 or 2 or 3 or however many of you that would like to get together and have a much more detailed conversation about how this group would make final decisions? Hands up. Anybody? Excellent.
That's awesome.
So, all right, terrific.
I'll do it too if you need another person, because Because I know nothing, so.
We need however many of you want to be a part of the conversation, Jace. Anyone else? Okay. So the last piece here, and this is a piece of paper in your packet, and this is about how this group interacts with the public. So if you can pull that out, and I'd like you to take kind of 1 or 2 minutes to read it. It's called Community Input Procedures. It's a draft. And these are suggestions to the committee, and the committee can choose to change your practices over time. What we're looking for tonight, is there anything in there that you just can't live with?
Where is this likely to be found?
It should be on the left side of your packet, maybe about the 3rd piece of paper back. Community Input Procedures.
Is this open to questions?
Yeah, question, Kim?
Oh, yeah, what is, can you define, shoot, I just lost it, spokespersons?
No, that was my question.
4B, is that district people, or is that, community members?
It
Is it
could-
teachers, is it students?
It could look like a lot of different things. If you are going to a particular school, maybe the committee would want to invite the principal or the PTA president, or, I mean, this is where.
Or a teacher.
Or a teacher. You guys know your community better than I do, right? I mean, this is sort of an open-ended placeholder. If this committee knows of some particular expertise that you'd like to come and make a specific 2, 3, 5-minute presentation, this is creating space for that.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to pose a question to the group. In the first 3, numbers 1, 2, and 3, is there anything there you just can't live with that you object to? Okay, let's shift to number 4. I'm breaking that out separately just because there's A through F. Is there anything in number 4 that a committee member just can't live with? Scott? I can't tell if your hand's up or not.
It's kind of creeping up there. So if we're dealing with a school community, how do we ensure diverse participation in the school community testimony?
That's one of the foundational, fundamental questions in my head.
So you can see what we wrote under D as, so I think the reason that D is there is to call out that that's going to be a goal. And then there are different strategies depending on what's happening in the room, who's in the room, what the issue is, and the degree of difference that you're looking for. But I think the point is that we want to start by saying this isn't just about first come, first served. It's about trying to hear multiple perspectives in that time. Open to different language.
So Kim, and then
I'm just a little concerned about 30 minutes. That doesn't seem enough to get a diverse and multiple perspectives from a community that is going to be impacted greatly by decisions that could be suggested by this committee. I don't feel comfortable with only 30 minutes. I don't know if I'm alone in that thought.
It might depend on my comment, which is, what are these people supposed to be talking about? They're not gonna be talking about commenting on a proposal, because there's not gonna be a proposal. They're gonna be commenting about whatever they want, something specific, their opinion about overcrowding specifically, are they gonna be giving us ideas for what they think it's pretty open-ended, so we could just get a lot of people just being angry, or a lot of people being really constructive, but it might not be directed at all towards what we're supposed to be doing.
So as the committee, you could invite comment on A, B, C, D, E.
That
I mean,
would
you
be
could-
helpful.
You could fill in the parameters that you wish.
And they're not going to get a chance to comment on the proposal because all I'm seeing is one meeting for say Beverly Cleary. So they have 30 minutes to, I would like to have it be spent constructively.
Mhm.
So I think that they need some, whatever word, it needs to be clear.
So it would be staff's intent, if possible, to bring you some starting point for considering a boundary. So we would come to you with maps, some lines drawn
At that meeting.
at that meeting, in advance if possible. I mean, the meeting is 2 weeks away.
I
And,
think that to get the most
and
out
that
of
would
it-
be available to people publicly in advance as well. It wouldn't just be yours, it would be the
Right,
public's.
so that they could come and give us their opinion on a pre-proposal or something like that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I think I've heard a lot of what people are gonna say
Okay.
already. I mean, personally, everybody here hasn't, but
And one other thing I want to mention is that I don't think the intent was to limit dialogue to 30 minutes. It's a notation that we're asking you to stay for a half an hour longer, but the portion of time for public input isn't determined yet. It would likely be more than 30 minutes. Would it be enough? That's always the question.
Mr. McGee.
So, sort of following your trend here, I would hope that we wouldn't, when folks, some folks, when people sort of get going on a topic like this, it can kind of be forever. And while I
So 30
love to
minutes,
hear,
isn't it?
while I love to hear feedback, I also want us to make sure that we're driving this to an outcome, and that we aren't just being polite. And so, finding whether it's like maybe everyone gets a minute or 2 minutes, that sort of drives to that, so that we're not here, to the wee hours.
Yeah, you are all volunteers, right? Well, I guess you're getting paid to be here, but most of you are volunteering to be on this committee. So with number 4, given the conversation we just had, is there anything in there you can't live with?
I want to go back to what Judy just said. I'm sorry. It sounds like, so something is going to be presented that we're going to hear feedback on. How is that going to be presented? Is it going to, because we're going to be there as D-BRAC to hear feedback, but it's going to be something that the district has come up with.
Correct. Yes, so the idea is that staff will start the ball rolling by giving you baseline information and giving you a sense of, if the line were here, here's the kind of numbers that you would be looking at, here are the kind of impacts that are there. It's a starting point and open to your consideration. And then you have a chance to ask questions about that. You have a chance to hear what people think about that, and then you have a chance to tell us what you would like to see different.
So
Differently.
we'll be hearing it at the same time that the public's hearing it?
Essentially.
Essentially,
because
but
of this
they'll know
time
what
frame.
it is because
Yes.
we want to make sure that the
I think so.
stakeholders would know. Okay, so it won't be presented as, here's a suggestion that D-BRAC came up with, what's
No,
your
ma'am.
public comment?
No, ma'am. I think that we
Okay.
have to be very, very transparent about how we're starting this process very quickly.
Okay.
And that you're relying on staff as the starting point,
Okay.
not as the end point. But, and I mean, that's our intent.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. McGee.
But also
Nisha's
love to,
on.
as you're presenting it, to almost weigh it against your equity policy and sort of what's currently, sort of what would be the current impact and what's the, future impact.
Equity impact.
Yeah.
Nisha?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say something similar to that, and then also just to piggyback on what Kim Tim said, if we're making recommendations or regarding hotspots, and let's say they result in boundary changes, then when we do the district-wide boundary review, are those things set, or are they reviewed again? Or, I mean, is there a,
You guys will get to choose.
situation where a boundary might change twice in 2 years? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I would think that that would be highly unlikely, and it would make it a decision that you would likely not want to make. So,
Okay.
so you're not going to see this as feasible if you think that there's a high risk of that. You need to know enough about all the rest of the dynamics that are in play in order to assess that. That's our job, to try and help you be informed with that at the same time as you're hearing multiple perspectives about what the impact would be. And
Can I say one thing really, really fast? Which is, I'm worried that we're gonna have some option anxiety, and I know that I felt option anxiety when I looked at the Jefferson cluster options, and so I can't possibly be the only person that would feel that way, and like 3 options is a good number. More, multiple pages of options is really, I'm not
So
gonna
it-
do well with that.
limit options, yeah.
Yeah, it needs to be
Understood.
digestible for the committee to get your heads around. So I'm a little nervous because we're 12 minutes over on this agenda item. So on 5 and 6, is there anything there that you just can't live with? Tony?
I just, a general, since we're at 5 and 6, I'll take that as a thing at the end. A general comment about community input. It really doesn't talk about, is there any responsibility to respond? You know, is there a frequently asked questions where they ask stuff and staff is responding to these questions? Or are we just hearing the input and collecting it on a piece of paper? What's our responsibility with this input?
That's a good question. We don't have to decide that right now. We could have, are there a couple of committee members that want to take a little bit of time to formulate what you think the committee's responsibility should be? Hands up, at least Tony,
Since I
it's his
threw it on the
question.
table, I gotta throw my hand in the air. So, I'm not the answer man on that.
Well, if it's a subcommittee of one, you will be the answer man. So Tony's bid for world domination, going once,
I actually
going
think
twice.
I think I believe staff have some say in this too, because, so.
We can work together to
Okay.
come back with something, and that's a really good point. It's left hanging there, so thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, so unresolved question around D-BRAC responsibility to respond to input from the public. So at this point, thank you everyone for, oh, yes, Sasha.
I'm sorry, I know we're over. I noticed the last one, it says here, contact information will be posted online, but if we're videoing things and it's a public document, I just wanted to ask the question, is this a videoed meeting? Are people able to deliberate? Do we have a thought on that?
The first meeting was not recorded. This meeting is being recorded. It's, I mean, at a certain level, it's your committee. You can make your own choices about how you want to do that. And there are pros and cons to it.
I'd suggest it is a decision point. I think people will have a thought and feeling about it. So, and I've been in situations where there's been confusion about it, and it seems to me like the committee should agree to how they want to handle it.
So we'll make sure that is on the agenda for the next meeting.
Since the next meeting is likely to be at a school with a lot of people there, I think we probably need to get your sense now. So can I just ask the question, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but would people be in favor of, comfortable with the next meeting being videotaped or recorded and available to the public? I'm seeing thumbs. Is there anyone, okay, so let me do it the other, is there anyone who has significant concern with that you? want to express right now.
I guess I would have asked that if this is for a board member, that it would have been asked. I don't know.
I understand.
I
I-
kind of.
What do you mean by it's for a board member?
This is being reported for a board member because they can't be here. And I guess that seems a little, I don't know what the word is. It's just a little
No, once-
irritating.
Once the tape is released, there's no control over where it goes. And especially since we're in such a draft mode, things can easily be edited, then suddenly your draft becomes someone's core reality. And that's a concern over how this is used when it goes out.
Mhm.
Which leads me, I do have a comment to add for something that I find remiss on, I guess it would fall under number 6, is that when, I would like to see on the website where public comment is accepted, that it be very clearly expressed that all comments become part of this public record.
Terrific.
My concern with the taping, will you tape every meeting, including when we're really deliberating around the recommendations? My concern is that it may limit being really candor if, say I say, yeah, close Roseway Heights and do it without.
Oh my gosh,
you
did
know,
you hear what she said?
I would say exactly that,
Yeah,
but it gets
yeah.
out and none of us can be totally honest to for those of us especially who represent a community who has a really
Yeah.
vested stake in this.
Mhm.
I get it now when we're gathering information, I have no problem, but I am worried if this goes out and I won't be able to be completely candid. Does that
So
make sense?
it does, and I will let you know that in SACIT meetings, we had a statement, because there were SACIT, so that was the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on
Same issue
Enrollment and
there,
Transfer.
yeah.
They had a statement on the agenda that said they preferred to not be taped or photographed in order to create a comfortable environment for the committee to do their work. And that was seen as legal at the time. It may still be legal. We do have a challenge to
Or can we
our
go into
procedures.
executive
but-
session kind of thing?
Okay.
Like the board does?
All right. We'll
So,
find out for you.
My question is, where then is our accountability, right? Like, if we are,
Sitting over there.
well, yeah, but, so, I don't see one black parent over there.
You're
I
right.
don't see one Latino parent over there.
You're totally right.
Oh, there is? Okay, perhaps, yes,
Yeah.
perhaps.
profiling, right?
But, like, if you think about what our district looks like, sorry to say, but it's not represented back there. And so, if we are gonna talk about equity and we're gonna say we mean this stuff, and if we're gonna have all these great Portland conversations, let's do it.
I hear you.
So how about if we
So-
expand Tony's group, response
Yeah.
group, to also be the, let's figure out, let's come back with a plan for, so if people are not opposed to taping the meetings that are at schools, I'm thinking of parents who might want to come and can't and want to see you active there. And then before you come back in January, we will have a plan that you will have a chance to see and respond to, vote on if necessary, that will be for your January meetings. Is that fair? Okay.
So who else wants to be part of that subcommittee to work on the video piece as well as what's the committee's responsibility to respond to input? So we had a bunch of concerns.
I'm already on stuff.
You're what?
All right, we'll ask again at another meeting. So thank you very much for thoughtful discussion. Most of those topics could be something the group could spend an hour on each. So I'm actually pretty happy that we went as far as we did. So changing gears, one of the things that is important about this group is the skills, knowledge, and experience that each of you have and bring to the table. And over time, it's highly likely that you will be learning a lot from each other. And that starts tonight with one of your colleagues on the committee, Hector, is going to lead us in this next agenda item. And I think we should go for 15 or 20 minutes.
Right.
And we'll turn it over to Hector.
Okay. So let me say two things. I'm going to kind of give you the Reader's Digest version of the racial equity lens tonight, but we can revisit it as a group as we get closer to making some decisions. So I will just say that for now. So you should each have two different handouts. One is a bookmark of the district's racial equity lens, and it's basically the 5 questions that you're asked to do when you actually use the worksheet for the racial equity lens. So I'll just quickly say how we use this in Sackett was the committee members familiarized themselves with the 5 questions. And I can tell you, as each subgroup went back to do their work, they asked of each other these 5 questions. We also, towards the end of their work, took one of their recommendations through the actual worksheet. And so how this group will end up using it is up to this group. And I get, even just from hearing the last conversation, we've got some short-term time challenges about how we'll actually get to invest the racial equity lens, other than asking the questions. But I'm hopeful that over the long haul of this group's work, we actually will get to use the worksheet more specifically. So, the 5 questions on the worksheet, I will say it's an iterative process. So the first question is, who are the racial ethnic groups affected by this policy, program, practice, or decision? And in your case, anticipated decisions. And what are the potential impacts on those groups? So this used to just be a blank question. Folks asked us to include some examples of racial ethnic groups that you might want to consider. And so you'll see in the far left-hand column, different groups named. The middle column is what are some of the potential positive impacts, and then what are some of the potential negative impacts. So when I say this is iterative, the first time you ask this question, it might just be folks around a table to get the best thinking of the folks who are in the room around the table. The third question, however, asks, have you intentionally involved stakeholders from the communities affected? And so how this becomes iterative is that first you just get the best thinking around the table, but then you need to go out into the community and confirm your observations, both about who's impacted, but also about what is the impact based on their lived experiences in general and with Portland Public Schools in particular in this case. So you need to go out and confirm what your first initial observations are. So to get back to the second question, does this policy, program, practice, or decision ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? So you might ask those first 2 questions, again, with the best wisdom around the table, but then you need to go back out into the community to confirm what you believe are the unintended consequences. And several of you talked about needing to get multiple perspectives at the table. It occurred to me this might have been a good tool to use when you were deciding how you get those folks to the table. Okay, so you've got some initial ideas about who's impacted and how. as you move forward, you might want to use this as a tool to even answer those kinds of questions. The fourth question is, what are the barriers to more equitable outcomes? And it gives a list of what some of those potential barriers might be. So mandated, legal, political, emotional, financial. And to your question about wanting to be candid in these conversations, it might be easy to identify, so what are some of the legal and mandated barriers? It might be harder to talk about what are the emotional, social, political barriers, but you need to identify what those barriers might be for your work to succeed. Okay? And then the fifth question is both about the initial impacts that you identified and then the barriers that you identified. What are you as a group going to do to mitigate the negative consequences, the negative impacts, and the barriers? So an example that I like to use is that, so for mandates, often mandates take on a life of their own, and when the actual mandate is this, but over time the practices become this. So part of a mitigation strategy is what actually is the mandate that we think is getting in the way. Same thing is true, so for what are some of the social and community barriers? We may have a myth about what those are, but by going to the communities, you can help resolve those myths. And then with the information that you find out, what are you as a group going to do to mitigate, again, both the impacts and the barriers? It could be communication. It could be advocacy. It could be clarity. But what are you going to do to mitigate the potential negative impacts on you? I was going to give you an example to work through tonight, but because of where we are in the agenda, if you want to have a more detailed chance to practice this, we can do this at a future meeting. But I do want to offer again, so the board members now have this at the dais when they're hearing testimony. And I've observed over time, they ask more of these questions now when somebody comes to them with a proposal. They now go into the racial equity lens and ask some of those questions. Did you have, yeah?
How did you know? There was, can we post this on the D-BRAC website too?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Because people are like,
Yes.
what is the lens? And
Okay.
Absolutely.
I looked for this handout, but I couldn't find it.
No, that's a great idea, actually.
And I'll also make sure that on your resource sheet, the link is on there.
So what I'm going to ask you to do for tonight is, as you're listening to Judy's presentation, think through a racial equity lens as you hear what she's saying. So we're not going to have a chance to go through it formally, but I would at least have you ask for yourselves these 5 questions as you're hearing Judy. And actually, that's not a bad way to start practicing thinking about it and using it, and then having an opportunity to use it in a more formal way. And I will say, while we haven't fully integrated this, there are many departments that use the racial equity lens in making their decisions, including the budget department. So they asked these questions when they were approaching creating last year's budget. People who owned pieces of the budget were asked to answer these questions as they were submitting their budget. So it's a practice that we're trying to more fully integrate here into PPS. So again, that was the Reader's Digest version, but any questions about how you might use this and what the questions might be? Okay, cool, thank you.
Thank you, Hector. So we've had a couple of committee members come in since we did introductions. So if you can just, the 3 of you, introduce yourself with your name and your organization, and what was the last foreign country you were in? And if you've not been to a foreign country, what was the last state besides Oregon or Washington that you were in?
Good evening. My name is Mike Pichet. I work for Portland Community College in the southeast part of Portland. And the last country I visited was Colombia.
I'm Joe Zender with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability in the City of Portland. And the last country I was in was Sweden, where the biggest treat for the guy sitting next to me in the restaurant was that he got a Lagunitas beer.
Yeah.
My name is Maxine Fitzpatrick, and what was the other?
What was the last foreign country you were in?
Last foreign country, last foreign country that I visited was Panama.
Thank you. So, oh, and Jane, sorry.
I'm Jane Leo. I'm here for the Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors, and it's 6,600 members. And the last foreign country would be Vermont.
That's more foreign than
Which is not Canada. Okay, so one of the things when you're starting out as a group and as a group facilitator, you're trying to learn about the group. And we've had a lot of good discussion and a lot of good questions that were really important about how this group wants to do things. And it means we're pretty behind on the agenda. So I want to pose a choice to the group. Option A would be that we extend the meeting for 15 minutes so that we can get through a bunch of the material that a lot of your questions were alluding to earlier. Option A, extend by 15 minutes. Option B, we still end on time at 8 o'clock, but what we would do is we would switch the public comment period till now, and Judy would somehow do the impossible and dramatically compress things. Any questions about option A, 15 minutes longer, or option B, public comment period now and ending on time with a compressed presentation? Who is interested in option A? So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Option B. Okay, so.
This would be the last day I do the impossible.
Okay, so.
That's awesome.
Based on the committee, we will end at 8:15. So it is 7:05, and we are turning things over to Judy.
All right, good evening, everyone. First thing I'm going to do is, because there are some empty spots at the table, I'm going to ask some of our key staff to come in and sit at the table. You're going to have a little bit of time to work together, not very much, but I want you as committee members to know some of the people who are doing the hard work that's going to make this happen in the next coming weeks. So Sarah King, our facilities planning director, and Mary Pearson from special education, and Dr. Adair, please come to the table. And Sean Helm, who is the guy who will help us build the models for boundary change, along with Wayne Coffey. Wayne, Terry Brady, our transportation director. Please come and fill a seat at the table and mix and mingle. The other thing that does is and Mark Van Humison, who is our backup PAPSA member, and is welcome tonight too. So please feel free to integrate. We have a lot of materials to go through. You'll need a little bit of space. Folks in the public, you now have a little more room to sort your papers out. What we are going to do, this PowerPoint is in your packet on the left-hand side if you'd like to follow along. We're going to continue your orientation. Today is the last day of boot camp. At the end of it, we will have introduced 15 different schools. 13 of those are really just for your information and optional individual response. But 2 of the schools are places where we think that a boundary change is feasible that would not negatively impact nearby, that would have minimal impact on other schools and in fact might be seen as a win-win. And so those are the places that we would ask you to consider that, and those are the focus of your coming meetings as Jim outlined earlier. So I'm going to dig in. If you have your packet from last week, you have your map of the district. If you didn't, we're providing you a different map today. Same district, different view. So this is, I think, on the right side of your packet. And this map illustrates the concentrations of students who are identified as combined underserved. Here, you can see the what that category means. So less than dealing with it's not so much about where the boundary lines are, it gives you a picture of the populations that we serve. So when you're looking at your racial equity lens and you're thinking about the kids that we need to serve, this is a geographic representation of our combined underserved students. Okay. PPS operates 78 schools covering K-12. We also have students in Head Start programs that are at 8 school sites. We have students at community-based, special service, and 8 charter schools. So I'm going to take you from our portfolio down to 2 schools. We're going to go about 35,000 feet in about 30 minutes. Fasten your seatbelts. Keep your hands and arms inside the ride. 69 schools have boundaries in PPS. That's what these little lines are. A boundary is a line around a school that's a guaranteed attendance zone, guaranteed for most students. There are a few exceptions to that. Every address in the district is mapped to a school zone, okay? If you decided to camp on Ross Island, we would assign you to a school. District-wide, 65% of our kids attend that assigned neighborhood school. They go where the boundary tells them to go. And the range, that's the district average, but the range is from like 49% at King to 94% at Forest Park. So the range of attendance at neighborhood school varies greatly. If they're not going to their neighborhood school, where are they going? So this is a topic that we could spend 3, even 6 hours on. You get 10 seconds. They go to other neighborhood schools, PPS options, which include our focus option schools, Access, Metropolitan Learning Center. Community alternatives is 2%, special schools for is 1%, and charter schools make up 3% of the public school population. Questions about where we are with student transfers that impact some of these things, I invite you to go to the main PPS webpage and click on the link for SACIT. That's the advisory group who is giving information to the superintendent. She is coming out with recommendations. There will be some policy changes, we believe, coming forward in the coming month. Okay, every year we do an annual assessment of enrollment issues. And we have enrollment targets in those that are rough ways of getting a picture of where we have enrollment challenges. They're not precise, but I'm going to describe those to you. When we do that target analysis, it's the first step in diagnosing over and under enrollment and then coming up with plans to address. So now I'm going to describe to you what the enrollment targets are. And I'm moving very quickly, and I'm not making eye contact. There's sticky notes on your table, and I'm going to invite you to, put a star next to something. I do want to hear your questions. And if I've moved to a place where you are totally stuck and lost and you need, you can't hear anything else until you get a question answered, go ahead and put your hand up. Okay. We have different configurations of schools in PPS. We have both K-5s that feed to middle schools, and we have K-8 schools. There were lots of decisions historically that led to those conditions, and so that's why you see different kinds of configurations that begin with the K. We have different target sizes for those schools. A target just means that there's a good chance that if you have enrollment around that range, then you're going to have enough students to generate enough FTE. FTE is full-time equivalent, for those of you who are not in the education system, to generate effective program for kids. You're going to be able to meet what we hope at the base level kids can have. If you're significantly below it, You're, as a school, may really have to struggle. You have to make a lot of decisions and trade-offs in order to provide core program. And if you're over it, we call that 100, we look at utilization, which is the comparison of teachers that would normally get a classroom versus the classrooms in the building. And if we see that you're over 100%, chances are you may have enough staff for programs and you have nowhere to place them. And so you're using every nook, cranny, and room in the building, and it's potentially impacting the quality of your program. I want to point out that when you see the list of the targets, it's schools with neighborhoods only, right? So we don't apply these same standards to our focus options. They're specialized schools meant to do a specialized thing. And there's that calculation again of what we mean when we say utilization. You are not expected to become experts at this today, but hopefully this level of the familiarity that you're getting tonight will help you as we move forward. Okay. Some limitations to having enrollment targets. There is no clear correlation between school size and student achievements. We can see that in our own data in Portland. You can see it nationally. Small schools do great, big schools do great. Kids achieve or underperform in every type of school setting that exists. So this isn't about finding the magic number, getting to the magic number, and then saying, we've closed the achievement gap. The targets don't accurately measure the impact of having co-located and partner programs on site. So many of our schools have SUN programs, have partners on site, have lots of additional people through grants and volunteers who are there to help support student achievement, and they're not really calculated in this, and that means schools may feel even more crowded than I'm going to describe them. I will tell you, in the 12 years that I've been doing this, I have never met a principal who said, you know, my school isn't really full, right? Every school is more full than I'm going to tell you it is. That's a fact. So, and that doesn't mean I don't take their word for it. We just try and create some baselines to work at so that you can get a sense of what it means when you look across schools. Okay. So where are we in terms of this year? There's a document in the back on the left side that you do not have to memorize tonight. That is a list of all of our schools in alpha order with the, and what the enrollment is this year versus last year, what the utilization is, and they're color coded so that you can see places where we have the greatest concern, either for under enrollment or over enrollment. If you sum that up, here's what you would see. Of our 26 K-5 schools, half of them are either quite a bit smaller than they probably need to be to have enough staff for a full program without additional supports, or they're already too big for their building. In our K-8 schools, more than half, 16 of 27, fall into those categories. At the middle school level, we've had this situation, if you recall the data last week about lower numbers of in the middle and high school grades. So we've had smaller middle schools generally over time. And last year there were 4 under-enrolled schools, now there's 2. We don't have any that are bigger than their buildings, but there's a chance that we'll be hitting that soon as our population ages up and our middle schools are getting bigger. And then you can see at the high school level, all we're really flagging is our community comprehensive high schools that are below a 1,200 benchmark, which was seen as a good point through our high school system design. Okay. It's really hard not to say more about this, but I'm moving. This is what we do every year. We start with, generating lists like this. So this is one thing that happens. It's a bottom up and a top down process. So bottom up is principals, teachers, community members in school saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? There's 34 kids in this classroom. There's no room to add. What are we going to do? And that bubbles up to our senior directors. At the same time, we have the top down, the central office folks like me and Sean Helm and Gretchen Holmes, who's our space planner, and would be welcome to join us at the table too. And Sarah, getting information that we're comparing across schools. And we bring those things together, meeting in the middle to come up with a list of priority schools where we do deeper review and develop options. So the schools that you're seeing right now are largely the schools that are on that list, but there are a lot of other schools that we're watching as well. So we're not going to talk about every full school tonight. We're just going to give you a sense of some of them, okay? The other thing that I want to say is this is the time every year when that work happens. It takes a while to get the data together that's really relevant to help us understand conditions in a school, like exactly where kids live, so that we know how many are in the boundary, out of the boundary, and the like. Okay, so we said we have ways to find out where we have problems and how to prioritize those problems. What do we do about those problems? I'm now going to describe for you the basic set of tools in the enrollment balancing kit. And as we go through the schools, you will see all of these as potential options in different buildings to resolve different problems. They're in order of least intensive to most intensive. First, we can reduce the number of transfers that have been allowed in a school. It's a simple thing to do. It can take effect immediately, but because it doesn't affect the kids who are already there, it generally is a small impact. It's something that you can do while you're figuring out how to make bigger changes. Boundary change, there's that B word again. It generally is one of the least intensive in that it doesn't take a lot of upfront resources to support, but there are often transportation impacts and other things. It's long-term change, but it does impact. There's very few times when you can do boundary change without impacting multiple schools. And it takes a long time because our standard implementation approach is one grade at a time. So it's slow, but it's big change. We can make facility changes, but that's fund dependent. There are a lot of site constraints on schools that prevent you from doing some of the more innovative and less expensive things that you might want to do. The good news is it's minimal student movement. You can keep kids where they are, and it doesn't impact other schools. More intensive program moves, where you're taking a group of students who are assigned to a school for a specific purpose, you're picking them up and you're locating them somewhere else. You have to have space at another school, and you're completely disrupting not just that population, but you're having to rebalance the entire programming of both buildings. So it's another very intensive set of changes. Grade reconfiguration. In the mid-2000s, Portland experienced a swath of this, which is one of the reasons why we have lots of K-8 schools now. It's very intensive, it's very rapid, it affects multiple schools at the same time, and it's a completely different program model than what was there before. So it's one of the most intensive kind of changes that you can make in a district. The only thing that's more intensive that's in our toolkit is to open or close a school. So that's the list, from just shut down the transfers to open or close a school, and some of the benchmarks that are in between. How we doing? Let's make this come to life at the school level. So every school in PPS is in the fold for district-wide boundary review. Okay? So that applies to every school that you're going to be seeing tonight. Plus lots of other schools that we're not going to talk about tonight. But schools that are below the targets, you know, when we looked at those enrollment targets, the under-enrolled, those schools for the coming year will be addressed through our annual budget cycle and equity funding. So we'll be looking to see what steps can be taken through a funding process to make sure that they have adequate program, even if their enrollment is small. So we're not moving kids in and out of small schools now. The only schools where we're looking at making some changes as needed are at over-enrolled schools, which are what is in this hotspots list. So these are a set of schools with recurring intensive over-enrollment challenges. There are 3 groups that I want to walk through with you quickly. How are we doing on time, Jim? How much time did that take?
We're doing good.
Okay. So I have 3 groups. The first I'm calling the monitor group, because they're schools that we're largely monitoring, and I want you just to get a sense of what they are, and we're going to do that together. There's an action plan group. There are some schools that do not have enough space this year for all the kids next year. We're going to have to do something about that. But at this point, we don't think boundary change is an option there. So we're going to tell you the kinds of things that we could do, and then we're going to figure out how to go and do it. And then there's those last two schools where, in addition to everything else we could do, boundary change could be considered, and that's what we're going to activate you around, okay? Breathe. Okay. How's everybody doing? Good. Awesome. There's chocolate on the table. On the right side, not anymore, she says. On the right side of your folder is a set of dossiers for 15 different schools. Let me explain to you what's in each one, and then we're literally going to go through like 1 minute per school for the first set. And you're going to help, like you're all going to get a chance to become experts. So the first one that I pulled out is Abernathy. The first page is their floor plan. So does everybody have their dossier? Okay. So this is a floor plan, so you can get a sense of what the school looks like on a room configuration basis. I'm not going to explain in detail. If you're not a you don't like looking at plans like this, you don't have to spend time looking at it. But some people really like these. Gretchen Hollins, who is like a resident expert on each of these floor plans and a photographic memory of all of them, would be able to answer questions that you might have if you want to grab her later about any particular school. These are not as updated as we would like. Every year we make small adjustments to a small set of schools. So we may talk about some things that are not reflected in these. This is the best that it was available on our budget. The next page is a boundary map. This is the physical space that is assigned to that particular school. The dots, see all those little dots all over the place? The dots are kids. And the size of the dot is a rough explains the number of kids who live within that census block. So I'm looking at Abernathy and I'm seeing lots and lots of little dots. Kids are pretty spread out. When we get to some other schools, you will see some big concentrated dots. The numbers are within the red lines are the total population of K-5 students who reside, not attend, but reside, that live in that area, okay? So you can get a sense of geographically where the kids are, what's happening in that boundary. The next two pages are the good ones. Forget all those pictures. Just look at numbers, people. And numbers will set you free. This chart gives you an overview of the school's enrollment on the left side by grade. This is current year. Number of teachers, other people who would generally be assigned a classroom in the middle. Down here also in the middle, their demographic profile. This is from last year because we don't have all the demographic information loaded in this year. There's the percentage of students of color, percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced meals. We need to put a dictionary together probably. Students who qualify for English as a second language services. Students who qualify for special education services. Okay, so there you can see your percentages at Abernathy. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you've got some points of comparison. So what's their utilization now at the top? And then go down about 4 rows, and then some comparisons to other schools that are in this group, their student-teacher ratio, and then the estimated utilization next year. If nothing changes, they have the population we project, how many kids, how full is the school going to be next year. Part 2 is a quick summary of what's happening in that building in words. And then part 3 are the options that we think are open to consideration at this point regarding that school. So that is there's a key in the back on this one. For most of the schools, this page is divided into two. There's just too much information. So, do people feel like they could read through these things on their own? You want to practice with a few of them? Yes, Scott?
So in real life, what is a utilization rate of 105%?
It means that there are more teachers who would normally have a classroom than there are classrooms in the building. It means there are more than 100, but there isn't room for all the teachers. They've had to figure out how
Somebody's doing
to.
a class in the cafeteria at some point in time, or
It could be that their special education staff are sharing a room. It could be that the art teacher doesn't have their own room. Yes.
There are part-time teachers also that will teach on one day that goes into a different school, and sharing a room with the teacher.
So, yes, Joe?
So in the rank, the group of 15 in this Abernathy, it's 15, what?
Okay, so if you go to the key,
What's on the back?
yeah. Utilization rank, is it utilization rank?
Yeah.
Is D, is among the 15 schools that we've monitored in this set. This is where they fall in that set. So you can see just it as a comparison to all the others in this group that we're talking about.
And the highest one is the highest?
The highest one is the most crowded. Okay. So in this monitor set, because we're just monitoring them now, I thought we would just go around and read aloud a few of these key pieces, and we're just going to quickly go through each school. So I'm going to start at this table, and the first thing I'm going to ask is for someone at this table. So the next school in the set is Alameda. Oh man.
I might be.
Give ringer. Let's do a ringer. Can anyone at this table point to a place on the district map where Alameda is located? Ding, gold star for Nisha Saxena. Okay, thank you. Could someone else at this table turn to the enrollment worksheet and which is the back page. Or so the enrollment worksheet, it has all the numbers on it.
The front page of the back page.
The front of the back page.
Yeah.
Okay, and read one statistic from the 2013 demographics. Just read one of them out loud for us.
Students of color, 13%.
13% students of color. Thank you. And what is the overall enrollment of that school this year?
760.
760 students. Excellent. And what will their utilization estimated at for next year?
99%.
99%. Could one of you read out the top of the back page, which is their brief issue summary?
So Alameda enrollment is slowly stabilizing / declining after a small boundary change was implemented in 2012. The school has relatively large class sizes, which are even larger at times when special education students are mainstreamed into some classrooms. There is only one adequate space for instructional support.
And you do not have to have been a former Alameda Site Council member to do such a great job. That was a great job. Thank you. Okay, a very brief look at Alameda. Let's move to the next school. What's the next one in the pile?
Astor.
Astor. Can someone from this table point, please, to where Astor is located in Portland Public Schools? Right here. Does everybody see that?
No.
And the reason that I'm saying it is because I don't expect you all to know these things. Well, I expect some of you to. The transportation director definitely has to know these things. Thank you. Could someone at this table please read one key piece of demographic information about Astor?
Students of color is 41%.
41%. Can someone read out what their, one key factor in their enrollment from the far left corner?
The total is 497.
497 students. And so where do they come in at in terms of utilization? 107%. And what about next year?
Same.
Stays the same, 107%. Would someone read the Alameda summary from the back? I'm sorry, Astor summary. I don't know.
Astor
Center has a large grade level moving through the system and hosts a special education classroom. Modular classrooms added in 2011. Special ed staff have already doubled up to use less space. If a future kindergarten has more than 75 students, the school will be one classroom short. There are not enough spaces for instructional support.
So this is a school that's very full. They've already figured out how to squeeze. You were talking about what does it mean in real terms. They've already figured out some ways to squeeze. But if they've got one bubble grade, you can see a bigger grade moving through. But if they get another one next year, we've got a problem that building can't manage. That's why they're on our watch list. Hello, Michelle.
Can I make an equity lens observation?
I hope you do.
So one thing that came up with Alameda was that their classes are really full, which I know is true. So class size is not on here, and class size intersects with utilization in a big way. And when principals are working to use their equity money, one of the things they often do is to lower class sizes, which means they need more space in their buildings, and that is not reflected in these analyses.
So the student-teacher ratio is a way that I've included that information. So if you go to the far right, there is a student-to-teacher ratio.
And those are
So
classroom teachers?
They're classroom
Not-
teachers versus number of students in classrooms, and then I've ranked that as well, so that you can see that some of these schools are running much higher student-teacher ratios than others.
Okay, thank you.
Can I clarify that really quick? There's nobody else included in that student-teacher ratio, because I know it's a district.
Well, let's see what it says in the back. Don't trust me to know it. Among 15 schools monitored, the average ratio is 20.4, yes, but I didn't tell you what it's made of. I think it's only, no, I think that it includes all of the teachers who would have a room. So it isn't the same as class size, but it does let you see things like schools like Alameda that have full-time classrooms for special education would fit into that.
Okay.
So you get to see that.
But for example, ESL teachers, ones that may travel
Mhm.
around, special ed teachers that don't have a classroom per se, excuse me, are they included in that ratio?
I believe they are, and I need to double check. I can't do the math in my head right now to check it in my head, but I believe that they are.
Because that could be problematic, that kind of.
So it's
skews the numbers.
consistent. That's the only thing about it, is that I'm applying it the same to all of them. That's the only, so the point is like who's got more and who's got less in this group, and does it make a difference? Okay, we are on Harrison Park. And so where's Harrison Park? Anybody? Oh my gosh, it's all the way in the southeastern edge, right here. So for those who don't get out to outer southeast, very often it's way out there. And two facts about Harrison Park that you think that you're noting or that you want to.
Yeah, students who qualify for free or reduced meals, 85%.
85%. So right away in 4 schools, we have crossed the spectrum of poverty in our schools,
Can I do
right?
the other one?
Go.
The other one is 26% in ESL, and I'd like to add another equity comment, which is those services require space.
Those services require space. Jane, what stands out for you on this page? What are you looking at?
The utilization number of 118%.
118%. Now that assumes that each of their special ed teachers have a separate space, and they've already doubled up. Why don't you go ahead and read the summary, Scott, for Harrison Park and get the picture of where they are.
Harrison Park has grown considerably in recent years. The school qualifies for a high number of instructional support, special ed, and ESL staff, and has a thriving SEM program that serves many students and families. Special education staff have already doubled up to use less space. Some interior changes have been made to increase support spaces in the past. Lower kindergarten enrollment this year may result in 1 fewer classroom needed next year. However, larger kindergarten enrollment could cause additional overcrowding in the future.
So, in the case of Harrison Park, what's going on right now is that they were staffed for 4 kindergartens. Their enrollment came in a little bit lower. So they'll probably have 3 sections of first grade replacing 4 sections of kindergarten. We're figuring they'll still need 4 kindergartens next year. It's a very mobile population. It goes up and down and up and down. It would be a great place to be running at like 80% utilization. That would be a great school. They'd have so much room. And instead, they're at 105%. And I'm gonna suggest that we keep moving because we're almost done with this set and then you can get to take a breath. All right, what's next, guys, at this table? Laurelhurst. Now for something completely different. Where would you find Laurelhurst on this map?
My grant.
Near Grant High School. Everybody familiar with Laurelhurst over there by Grant High School? Okay. And so I'm flipping right away to what's going on with their enrollment. And anybody see anything going on with their enrollment that they want to point out?
It's staying the same.
And what makes you think that? Just go ahead and read out a number or a fact point that.
Changed by 1 from last year to this year?
It's only changed by 1 from last year to this year. What is their overall enrollment?
They're at 671.
671, pretty big school. And their utilization right now is
96%.
96%.
And it's projected for next year.
One of the reasons that I made sure that Laurelhurst was in this set is essentially it's a school that's been very full. It's adjacent to Beverly Cleary where you're going to be spending a lot of time, and I wanted you to be familiar with it. It isn't one of the schools that we might be most worried about because of space. And I think, so I'm just going to say, another factor that might be going through your head is do we prioritize schools based on the level of need in the building? And that is definitely part of our process. So yes, we want all schools to have enough space. But when we see schools like with the Harrison Park and the extra space needed to provide quality instruction for kids that we have historically underserved, we want to take care of those issues as quickly as we can.
That's a big question at my head.
What would this school like, what would this table like to talk about? Which school would you like to talk about at this table? Pick the next one on the list, please. Harvey Scott. Oh, all right. Who can say, and get this right because there's a Harvey Scott teacher in the room. So can anybody find Harvey Scott on the map? Right there. Okay. Outer Northeast, Coley neighborhood. Take a moment with your map, your boundary map. We haven't looked at those very much. So Harvey Scott boundary map. Remember how I was saying the size of the dots corresponds to the density of students in a specific census block? Census blocks are pretty small areas. You can see in Harvey Scott some small dots, and you can see some, one really big dot. How many students live in that? 260 students who reside in that census block in grades K through 8. Okay, so a very dense part of that population there. Did everybody see what Sasha just pointed out? Again, I'm just trying to make sure that you're comfortable with the materials. Does everybody see a census block with a large dot?
Yes.
And that there are 260 K-8 students who reside in that area. That's what that information is.
Extremely, I mean, it's very large students of color too.
Yes.
Somali population and Hispanic population.
And this is, it's public housing, it's publicly subsidized housing. It's where many of the newcomer families to Portland land. It's highly mobile, and it's a population that we need to be able to serve very well. Harvey Scott works hard to do that. Anything else about Harvey Scott's enrollment that this table would like to point out? Or do you want to just go ahead and read the summary?
Well, not as bad as some of our other buildings, but if our target program size for K-8 is 500, and it's not quite there and it's overutilization, might indicate that the building's not right size to hold a K-8 program.
The building may not be right size. So Tony is analyzing very well. That's what he does. There's one thing that I want to point out with Harvey Scott, and that is that they have very small kindergarten class sizes this year, and one strategy for relief is that they can compress those to fewer sections for next year.
Oh, okay.
I'm not, this group, I'm not recommending it, I'm pointing it out because that's what the difference in utilization is.
Can I say something really fast?
So I'm not letting anybody else, Michelle, so I'm gonna be really mean.
No, I don't care, it's fine.
That's fine.
No, I mean,
It's on tape.
It's fine.
Hi, folks. Hi. You are the last table for this particular group, and I think you've got the Sylvans, East and West. What can you tell us about East and West Sylvan? First of all, where is it located? So one thing you note is that it's 2 campuses, and they're several miles apart. I didn't look up the exact distance. Terry, do you happen to know?
Looks like a little over a mile, mile and a half.
Do you happen to know how far?
About 2 miles.
It's about 2 miles? Thank you. 2 separate campuses, and I will just, I will like
1.6 miles.
cut to the chase on this.
Thank you, James.
And that is, East-West Sylvan is on the list because they are a split campus and it requires considerable additional resources to maintain a split campus. And the community is very, very interested in finding a way to fit all in one campus, which, even though there are lots of classrooms on that campus, there isn't enough common space. So we've maintained a split campus. That's why you're seeing East-West Sylvan, even though, you know, I've been training you for 10 minutes now, look to the utilization, and then you get there, and their utilization looks like 73%. I'm thinking, why are you bothering me with this? I just want you to be aware that this is the type of issue that needs consideration as well, even though it isn't. It is a crowding issue because they're too crowded to be in one place. Okay. I'm going to give you 1 minute to turn and talk about what an aha that came up for you just at your table. If everybody just popcorn out at your table, an aha from that brief experience going through the monitor group.
So we're ending at 8:15.
So we gotta be community input at 8. I got 20 minutes. Okay. All right.
20 minutes. That's good.
I would like to know what I mean, I don't know.
You're doing okay? All right.
Yeah, I think this is really digestible for people to get into and look at and play
I feel like I'm back to being a grad teaching assistant.
No, this is
Okay.
This works. And you
All right.
room that works. Are we using one of these? We got another.
Okay. All right, I'm going to bring you back. Because those schools likely have solutions next year that don't require major change. I think I want to go to a slide here and share a little bit of info, okay? They're uncomfortable, but they're coping. Some of the schools have learned how to cope really well. They are all schools, especially, I'm going to say Scott, Harrison Park in particular, that we want to make sure we're paying attention to when we get to doing the district. You know, everybody says, let's do the whole district. We're going to do the whole district, but we have to do right by the whole district, and we have to do really right by some pieces of it. Because these schools have been in difficult situations for a long time. I wanted to point out who makes decisions about these kinds of changes. In case you're wondering. If it's transfer slots, it's the principals, senior directors, they give the information to my office. If it's facility change decisions, those decisions are made in conjunction with the senior directors, and the senior directors from the Office of School Performance, so OSP, and Sasha Parent is one of the senior directors in our Office of School Performance, and he's sitting by Tony Magliano, so like you can tell, these guys are good at making decisions together, that's why they sit together. Shaking Tony's pockets for some change there. Get us some changes here. Program move decisions. So the next set, we're going to show you places where moving programs may be necessary for next year. We're going to do everything we can to avoid it. But here's who makes decisions about it. It's assistant superintendents. for Office of School Performance, and it's supposed to say, and the program leadership. And then our last two schools, boundary change decisions, if a boundary change were going forward, we would look to D-BRAC to start a recommendation, which would go to the superintendent, and if she agrees, she would pass it forward to the school board. Only the school board makes boundary change decisions. So I'm going to walk you through, I'm going to ask you to walk all of us through 5 more schools that could have a program change or a facility change next year. And we're going to start with, let's start with this table. We'll start in the middle. Since I've been so mean to Michelle and not let her
Can I guess?
ask your
Can I
question.
pick one?
I'd like you to start with Bridger. So we should be at Bridger. This is the next set. Bridger, I'll just say this, is one of the schools, we have 2 schools like this in the district right now, that get checked for both being over-enrolled and under-enrolled at the same time. They're too small to meet the target size, and they're too big for their building. And you're going to hear about both of them in the next 5 minutes. So, we're on Bridger.
Right there.
Bridger is on the east of Mount Tabor, if you all know that area. All right.
Can I ask a question? Was it built as a middle school or a K-5?
Bridger, I believe it was a K-8. All of our schools were K-8s.
It was built as a K-8?
Let me check on that. Do you have your facilities book with you by any chance, Gretchen?
I'd like to
I have one here, because it may have been built as a relief school for different grades, because it's not that old.
I'd like to know that for all the schools.
Okay, so that information, we can get you a link to that information. Gretchen, will you look it up? Okay, tell us something else about Bridger to help us understand their situation.
Well, it's got 22 classrooms. Kelly has 37.
Bridger has 22 classrooms. Compared to what you've seen so far, that makes it a pretty small building. And how many kids in that building?
420.
Okay, within that 420, so I'm going to jump you ahead to the summary, because I want to also spend a minute on what their options are. Does somebody want to read the summary? They're getting kind of long.
I'll read it.
Okay.
Bridger has a small K-8 population split between neighborhood and Spanish immersion programs. Uneven distribution by grade levels leads to low student-to-teacher ratios and the need for more classroom space than at other schools. Bridger also needs space for instructional coaches and other support staff. The building is small and several internal changes have already been made to maximize classroom/support spaces. The middle grades program has seen substantial attrition in past years. Bridger will need 1 more classroom next year and more overtime as the immersion program ages forward and attrition rates improve.
19 8th graders.
19 8th graders in the whole school.
That's almost Vernon-esque.
And a really key point is because they're a Spanish immersion school as well, they don't get to just evenly spread kids across the grade level. You can have 35 non-immersion kids and 25 immersion kids. You can't just balance them out into 2 classrooms of 30. You're going to have 35 in one and 25 in another. Or you may need to have 3. So then you've got 2 really. So when we co-locate programs, it's space intensive. It's wonderful opportunities for kids, but it requires space. And Bridger does not have very much of it. So what are we looking?
Is that what you call it when you have a Spanish immersion in a neighborhood? It's co-located?
Co-located, yes. That's,
Right.
so I didn't see the answer immediately to your question of was it built for a K as a K? It would have been built as a K because it was built in the 50s. Yeah. So options for Bridger include, so now I'm going to turn your attention to the back side and this list of options. And you can see that every school that you're looking at has 2 options, pretty much. Boundary change or grade reconfiguration. In the district-wide boundary review process, we may be asked to look at grade configurations of schools. We don't know that yet, but it's a possibility. Certainly for a small K-8, one question might be, should it be a K-5 with a bigger boundary area because of the space needs? Other options for Bridger include program relocation, because they have an immersion program there. It's not something we're considering at this time. So you can see that it would be part of the district-wide boundary review conversation. So then what's another idea for Bridger? Anybody want to read what's in that fourth box?
Modular classes.
Modular classrooms. Tony's hair just stood up.
Temporary.
A modular classroom is an expensive addition. It's at least $400,000 for 2 classrooms, but it means you're not moving kids in other places. What would we do before that? We would look at to see if there's any other opportunities to make space in the building. So that's the kind of work that's going to be in the process over the coming weeks. Yes, Chuck.
So if I wanted to see this, what this might look like over a 5-year period, let's go to the PSU work.
Yes.
Because we don't really know how anomalous this is or sticky.
Right, how much this is right. So you do see the change from last year, and you do see what we expect for utilization next year if they just keep the same sections. So Bridger is a school with a lot of complexities and one that it may not be enough to just monitor. That's why I'm bringing it to your attention now.
How long has the immersion program been there?
Since 2006.
So is it all the way?
I believe this is 8th grade this year. Maybe it was last year.
Does every cluster have an immersion program?
No, the Wilson cluster does not have an immersion program.
And how are they usually decided?
Decisions have been made at different times in different ways. Right now, we have a dual language department that makes a recommendation to the superintendent and the board every year.
I'm sorry, but I'm noticing the time,
Yeah.
and there's a huge elephant in the room that I have to bring up. Are we gonna get to how it was chosen, that it was Chapman and Beverly Cleary?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So I just wanted you to be aware of these 5 schools, and then we're gonna spend a few minutes on those 2 schools.
Okay.
But if I'm not moving quickly enough, I'm happy, you know what, and that's a good point. We need to move on. So there are 4 more schools in your packet. Off the top of my head, they are Skyline, Creative Science, Kelly, and Sitten. Skyline is very, very small, 15 classrooms. It's in a semi-rural area in an urban growth boundary, so we couldn't put modulars on there if we wanted to. Skyline is a crazy problem. Read about it. We're interested in your opinion, but as a group, you won't be asked to make a decision about Skyline. The next 3 schools are co-located with Head Start programs. So we have one that's an all-choice school called Creative Science that was told to grow to 2 sections per grade level. Next year will be their final year of growth, and they're co-located with the Head Start program, and there isn't enough room for everybody to exist the way they are. We believe we've made pretty much every interior change that we can make. Kelly is a very low-income school in outer southeast Portland. They are a K-5 school that also houses the district's Russian immersion program and a very large Head Start program. So all those statistics about how many kids, what the demographics are for the schools and the Head Start programs are located on your enrollment sheet. And then finally, we have Sitten, which is in St. John's, on the edge of the peninsula, way up here. Very small school in a small building with a Head Start program that's serving the kids who live right there. And yet, it's been such a good thing to have Head Start, now they're growing. And they're gonna need 2 more classrooms over the next 2 years. Those are the kinds of tough issues that we have to face at those schools. And the purpose of that information is to give you the breadth of the kinds of issues that are out there and the way that we look at them. But we didn't want to take up so much of your time, even though we would love you to have more time to think about this. We know we need to accelerate right to the only two schools where we think boundary change is a potential, and those are the last two schools in the packet. And one is called Beverly Cleary, and one is called Chapman. And I'm going to do a 2-minute overview, and then I'm just going to open it up to questions until we have to break for public comment, okay? Beverly Cleary School is in the Grant Cluster. It's right here. And when you look at their map, you can see that there are 2 campuses. So Beverly Cleary was made a K-8 school beginning in 2006, and it had a split campus the whole time. There's a small building called Holyrood that's about a 2-block walk, and that's where the kindergartners are this year. They've had kindergarten, they've had first K1, K2, but as the school grew, grade levels had to move out of that building, and now it's down to just kindergarten. The main building is called Fernwood. It used to be a middle school. Most of the classrooms in the building are not accessible because of code for lower grade students, so K2 students can't be in that building. There aren't enough accessible classrooms the way we're operating now. The school has been growing rapidly. We've done a number of interior changes to try and keep everybody on those 2 campuses while awaiting district-wide boundary review. There is no nearby school with a lot of available space. There's some space at Irvington, but most of the population, as you can see from your dots, is in the central and eastern part of the boundary. Last year, we, through a community process, followed the direction the community suggested. Well, there were some tough choices out there, and the least worst choice was to move 2 grades of Beverly Cleary students to the Rose City Park campus. And you can see Rose City Park on the eastern edge of the boundary. It isn't technically in the Beverly Cleary boundary, it's on the eastern edge. The access school is located at Rose City Park. So in your packet, you have a data sheet for Beverly Cleary that shows where their kids are and what their utilization would be if they were all together on 2 campuses versus 3. And you can see what Access is. Access is our district-wide program for highly gifted students who also have not been successful at neighborhood schools. That's part of the criteria for entering there. They have a growth plan and need more space next year to meet that growth plan. So Beverly Cleary is spread across 3 campuses, which is extremely resource intensive. And the thought was that would only happen for 1 year, then we'd do boundary change, the real boundary change, and they wouldn't have to be on 3 campuses again. Because of the configuration of students and the number of young kids who can be on the Holyrood campus, it's not as simple as just holding the line again next year. It's very complicated. And so one of the thoughts that came up in staff discussions was, what if we created, so it's clear to us that Rose City Park needs to reopen. It was closed in 2007 when the district was undergoing downsizing and reconfiguration. It's in the Roseway Heights boundary. The kids who went to Rose City Park in the old days split. Some became part of Roseway Heights, and some became part of Beverly Cleary, Laurelhurst, and Alameda. What if we set a starter boundary for Rose City Park made up only of lower grades of Beverly Cleary students who live closer to that building, so that they could be permanently located there next year and know that it was their school. It wasn't an adjunct part of another school far away. It would be their school. It would be co-located with Access, but it would be the start of a new school. So to start a new school in year 1 with a small part of the boundary, and then in year 2, add the rest of the boundary, adjusting as necessary to balance enrollment between the rest of the schools, and making other critical decisions that have yet to be made, such as grade configuration.
Wait, just to clarify, that is a possibility, or that was the?
That is the possibility
Okay.
that we will ask you to investigate over the next 4 meetings. Actually, over the next couple of meetings, and then you'll be deciding whether it's a feasible idea, and if so, where you would draw the line, and what the limitations would be on
And we'll
that.
talk about high school as well.
So none of this would affect high school. None of
Yes, it
this
would.
affects high school. So here's the fact. Every school has a boundary, and the closer you live to the edge of that boundary, the better the chance that you'll be impacted by a boundary change that happens in the future. But we are not necessarily setting high school boundaries by reopening Rose City Park. And by the way, even if we were, historically, the boundary line between the 2 high schools there, which is Grant, and Madison, has been 57,
Which is what Rose City Park is on.
which is what Rose City Park is on.
So where's it
So,
going?
Where's the back?
It's
so,
on the Madison side.
It's on the Madison.
so,
No, but really,
what I would like you to have a chance to learn at your next meeting, what I would like you to have a chance to learn at your next meeting is what happened, is what the impact of being a split campus is, who it affects, what options there are to keep the current 3 campus structure next year, all as Beverly Cleary, and then what a starter boundary could look like. That's what I'm asking you to learn at the next meeting, before the next meeting. Okay?
Judy?
Questions about that? Yes, Margaret?
Judy, can we just do 1 more minute?
Okay,
If that's,
okay. I can do 1 question.
For 2.
For 2. So just on the map with our population dots,
Yes.
when it comes to Beverly Cleary in particular, is it possible to make this, what you're describing, it's a K-1, it's an early grades program? Can we make the dots specific to early grades and
Yes.
not just K?
Yes. You will see by grade how many kids are in each of those census blocks, and we will expand the map to show you the surrounding areas so that you can see, start thinking about what a long-term boundary would be. I can do, we haven't mentioned Chapman, but maybe you want to hold on Chapman. I don't know. Yes, go ahead.
This feels really uncomfortable and wrong that we are looking at 2 schools that are 29% of color
Mhm.
and 19% of color.
Mhm.
When we have other, and I get the whole
Mhm.
boundary change, stuff like that, but it just, based on the history, based on the Jefferson cluster thing that went on, it just feels wrong that our first choices of schools that we're going to look into are pretty darn white.
Mhm.
I have a huge problem with that. I mean, talk about the racial equity lens.
Because Harrison Park has 182%
Right.
utilization.
So,
That's-
so we're making every effort to not, so we don't have a means right now to move kids out of Harrison Park and solve their problem with boundary change without impacting lots of other schools. There's no way that we can see to do it without a significant domino impact, because they're right next to Bridger, and they're right next to Lint, and they're overcrowded, and it's messy. These are the only places where boundary change we see is even feasible without inviting those kinds of domino effects. But I totally understand your point, and in our planning meeting, raised that this is likely to be something that.
This is gonna be a
Yes.
huge, and it's not a PR issue, this is going to be a nightmare,
Okay.
to be honest with you. I just, based on how angry, and speaking from experience, how disrespected I felt as a white parent in Jefferson, talking to my friends of color from the Jefferson cluster, they felt even more disrespected, especially since many of them had been yelling about what's going on in the Jefferson cluster for decades. I'm nervous about this.
Thank you for raising that. Joe, I think you had a question. Can I, go ahead,
So
Sarah.
Judy, help us understand why I came into this thinking we were talking about the whole
The whole,
boundary.
okay.
Because then this wouldn't be just focusing on two very white schools. So I guess that would help me then.
So is there, because earlier when this came up, you said it sounded like a timing issue, right? So.
Because fall of next year.
So a decision needs to be made for a number of schools for next year. And places where we think we have a coping strategy, we're not gonna ask you to be involved in that decision. Places where there are other decision makers who are gonna be on the ground with that, we're not asking you to make those decisions. Places, the only places where we think you could entertain boundary change as a solution to the problem are the only two ones that we're asking you to develop your boundary change acuity
So
around.
what occurs-
But it doesn't mean that you are required to promote a boundary change for those schools. If it's not boundary change, it has to be something else.
So when boundaries are changed, what happens?
What happens when boundaries change?
Yes.
The board policy is that the next year, kids who live on the other side of the line, starting in kindergarten, go to a different school, unless they have a sibling at the current school, which means they have a guarantee to stay at the current school. New kids who move in, no matter what their grade, go to the new school. I'm gonna do 2 seconds on Chapman, and then I know we have to move to public comment. Chapman is a school that's very overcrowded. It's in Northwest Portland. It has growth through new construction that's driving a lot of the change. It needs more than a small boundary change to be healthy in the long run, but there is a potential for a boundary change between Chapman and Ainsworth, which is next door, and has too small of a boundary to generate a right-sized neighborhood program. So the two schools that I'm talking about are in here. They're adjacent to each other. This area that's between them is an area that could be considered to shift from one direction to the other if it were palatable for both schools, if it was a good starter of a solution for relief for Chapman and it solved an enrollment problem in Ainsworth. It's the kind of change that we would ask you to consider now because, and it wouldn't have to be something you go like, well, now that we've done that, here's 100 other things that aren't gonna work. So that's why we've added Chapman to the list. Our options for Chapman, aside from that, are not good. They don't have a third campus right now that we can figure out how to send them to. So that's why Chapman is on the list. That's why we'd like to schedule a meeting for you to go there, learn about it, and get that information. Beverly Cleary is considerably more complicated, and both of these schools are on the wider, wealthier end of the spectrum of all of the schools that you've looked at, and in fact of the district. So, so that's something to consider. So Jim, thank you for letting me ramble on. I just have to say, like, discomfort and non-closure, because that was a lot of information. You probably have 1,000 things that are ruminating right now, and I don't like leaving you hanging.
So, anyone else with yellow cards? Anyone, how many people want to talk? 1, 2, 3. All right, so let's, in no particular order. This is a 2-minute timer. We'll start with Dave. So Dave Porter.
I'm Dave Porter. I've got 3 points I want to make. I don't think your public access to you with email is adequate. I think you all ought to be willing to receive any email that the public wants to send to you, whether that's through one email that the public sends it to and it gets distributed to you all, or whether PPS gives you each your own PPS email and you're responsible for checking it. I think the public ought to have that kind of access. If you don't want to do that, you shouldn't be on the committee. 2, I think all the meetings ought to be public, and if they want to record them, or I want to record them, or anybody wants to record them at all, ought to be on the record. Again, if you don't want to go by those rules, in my way of thinking, you shouldn't be on the committee. And the 3rd is really, I think there's going to be one big issue, there's a lot of little issues relative, but the one big issue you got to deal with is the K-8 versus middle school. And if you don't come up with a strategy for how to do that, I think you're going to it's the big issue out there, the inequities, the perceived inequities between the two. I think the answer is somehow to come up with a proposal to be debated that would convert all of Portland Public Schools to middle schools. So that means just figuring out what that would look like so people can talk about it in a concrete fashion, the choice that they have. If you don't do that, I think you're just going to be wandering around forever in the swamp of middle schools versus KAs.
Thank you. James Roberts.
Thanks a lot. I want that. You yield the remainder of your time to the thing?
Yes, yes.
All right, I
You
got
mine,
quarters
James.
time and the
You got
rest.
it back.
I'm gonna give all you guys a copy of this because you might hear something interesting and want to look it up later. Can somebody help me hand these out? My name is James Robertson. I'll try to talk not too quickly, but I'm a Beverly Cleary parent. I live over on the east side where you guys are going to learn a lot about. I'm also the lead parent of a committee of people who live over there, Beverly Cleary people. There are about 75 families on the committee right now. At some point, you guys may want to hear from us directly. I encourage you to please get with me to help arrange that. What I just passed out to you all, I gave to the board early October, right before Judy's October 1 memo with the two options for us came out. I'm going to kind of read at you. I apologize, but I haven't had time to practice in front of my mirror at home. This is what I told them a month ago. I think it's still true. I think it's very apropos of what you talked about tonight. I'm at the beginning of my two. Have I used the orders yet? Where's the timer?
Yep, like a minute 50 left.
Okay. Theme, Beverly Cleary School at Rose City Park, BCS at RCP. That's what we call our third campus. It's cool. It's not hot. It's not a hot spot. That's the theme. What I told the board, I understand PSU will be presenting to you on Monday, this is about a month ago, about hot spots, kind of like you just heard here tonight, you guys, for D-BRAC. That, can't wait, potentially can't wait. I know PPS, ENT, and others are under a lot of pressure to declare Beverly Cleary a hot spot and do a quickie boundary out of the context and process of the district-wide boundary review you guys are going to do over time. Please don't buy the hype. The kids at BCS are having their best educational year in years, thanks to the third campus. We can and we should and we want to wait for our space issues to be solved the right way, in context, by you guys, thinking about everybody else too. All the kids, all the BCS kids, both west side and east side, all the PPS kids, not just the BCS kids. There's some facts here that you might find interesting. The third campus is 9 classrooms in Rose City Park. That's more classrooms than all of BCS Holyrood. It's like they rolled out a whole new school building for us. That's a hell of a lot of relief, pardon my French. And it's plenty to get us through the next couple years. Educationally, it's doing great. We got lower class sizes at all 3 schools. There's activity space at Holyrood for the kinders. It's great. Logistically, yes, the buses took a while to get going, but with a few buses, we've conquered the logistics. The 3 schools in this 3-campus school are all within 1.4 miles of each other. It's not 2 miles, it's not what everybody, it's 1.4. East and West Silver, 1.6, okay? 1.4 is not. We've conquered the logistics. We can roll it for a couple more years. We heard a lot, like you said, it's so expensive, so expensive. I don't know how you're going to educate these 850 kids cheaper. I'm ready to see a spreadsheet about it and hope it gets there. Am I already done? All right, well, this is why I passed it out.
The written is a really good idea.
There is more information. Can I read my bottom line paragraph?
No.
Bottom line, BCS RCP in 2014-15 is not a hot spot. It's a cool one, and if needed, it can stay cool through 2015-16. Other overcrowded programs of PPS should be so lucky as to have so much already done for them. PPS should put on its equity lens and focus on those other programs that may in fact have short-term hotspot needs and not, haven't been given 9 classrooms like we have. The fix for BCS should occur and only occur as part of the district-wide boundary review. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, sir. My name is Jason Wells, and I am a parent in the Lincoln cluster of a Bridal Mile kindergartner and a 6th grader at East West Sylvan. My comments are mainly geared towards Chapman and that side, since that's what I'm familiar with. But I believe that they are applicable to the entire process. According to the district's enrollment summary, Chapman has a total of 585 students from within its neighborhood and a total of 646 students altogether. So that's about 60 students that are coming from outside the neighborhood. If there's a problem with crowding, perhaps we need to look at the enrollment and transfer policies first. Perhaps we need to integrate that along with what's being decided here as well. In addition, it was mentioned that if changes are made to the boundary for Chapman or for Beverly Cleary, they won't be changed again with the overall district review. By doing that, by making that change, you're not just changing Chapman's, you're changing Ainsworth's as well. So you're deciding for more than just one school when you're making those boundary changes. So I believe that an overall look at the entire whole of the district and of the clusters should be taken rather than just jumping on it quickly. Thanks.
Thank you. So, wrapping up here, everybody's got sticky notes on the table. Pull out your pile. Get your pen ready. This worked so well last time, we're going to do it again. So, and this is a 1 or 2 minute thing. I recognize we are 1 minute over time right now. 1 minute over our extended time right now. So, given our scope of work and the 2 schools we'll be visiting, Beverly Cleary and Chapman, what do you need from staff to feel prepared for those 2 meetings?
Wait,
So,
can you say that
Scott.
again?
I think we should talk about whether we should do this. I'm hearing a lot of people, some voices, I would like to hear from other voices about whether we should do this. My alternative to say, we've got K-8, K-5 middle school. We've got, if we do district-wide boundary change, are we gonna move kids right away or just start with kinders? We've got a bunch of issues like that we need to figure out how to frame to go out to the public to get their input on. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on that I don't think we should underestimate how much and how difficult that's gonna be. And I don't wanna spend 2 months and with the high likelihood that we'll come back and say, oh, we don't have anything to say here. I would like us to discuss that. And I see staff listening and nodding their head, but are we here to do your agenda?
So from a couple of things. As a facilitator, you want to, large groups of humans are decision averse for a lot of reasons. And so as a facilitator, your job is to drive a group forward. And you need to go as fast as possible without the group falling apart. People have different comfort levels. I mean, a group of 25, 26 people, there's going to be a lot of different comfort zones about how much information you need to feel comfortable making a decision. And what's complicating for this group is we have this, to be able to recommend boundary changes that would take effect for next school year, there's this compressed time up front. And then in the spring, there is this profound civic engagement process the district and the community will go through that will last a considerable amount of time that will really help inform the longer-term district-wide work that you do. So we have this odd short window to, if the group thinks, make some recommendations for a couple of hotspot schools. And that's a distinct process from this much longer, more holistic look at things. So from, so that's a valid process concern for sure. It's not clear to me how to solve it, right? So as a facilitator, trying to help support the group to put you in a position to succeed on difficult issues, there's a lot of dilemmas here. And you've mentioned a lot of them tonight. So there's no easy answer. And we can certainly restructure the beginning of the next meeting to have a more in-depth conversation about this.
What if the conversation, what if the request was that staff take, between now and the next meeting, to come back with options that would both deal with the immediate issues that are Beverly Cleary, as well as sort of addressing this broader, because truthfully I think it's, in a lot of ways for me it sounds like an equity issue, right? So it is, how do you respond to the pressing need now, while also recognizing that at places like Harrison Park, kids are already being screwed, and they too deserve an opportunity. And so, how do you do both? I think staff really should probably think about, like, what are the options? What would, like, best case scenario, worst case scenario, looking at timelines, looking at what staff knows about, the realities of the district, and come back with proposals around that.
Joe?
Yeah, and I'm sorry I missed the first meeting, because I feel like I may be out of the loop a little bit. But just listening to this tonight, I gotta go back and study my briefs, because I need to understand what that is. But what would be helpful to me is understanding really the case for these as hotspots and what happens from inaction. So clearly they're a hotspot because if you don't do something expensive or damaging could happen, and it's not clear to me yet what that is. And the other one, and this is why I was feeling bad about missing the first meeting, is I need to ground myself in the sense of what success looks like for the big project. Like, we got a prize here, which is the district-wide redistricting, right? And there's things we want to accomplish with that, and we want it to succeed. And so in even deciding on a hotspot, I would be evaluating, does this mess up our chance at that prize? And so I've got to catch up to understand that choice.
Sure. Nisha, then Michael, then Michelle.
Yeah, and I'm also feeling a little rushed with the hotspot process, and just taking the example of Beverly Cleary, because I know a little bit more about that, and I feel like I know nothing about what's happening at Chapman. I feel uneasy with the starter school option. I'm uneasy with the 3 campuses, and I feel like I will never know as much as James and Heather and Judy about what's happening locally with those schools, and that we won't be able to get up to speed in the amount of time we have. So yeah, I'm uneasy with us kind of focusing on these hotspots when, as I think as Scott said earlier, the staff and the community have gone really deep onto these issues.
Michael?
I gotta say, I agree with some of these points. We're being asked to come up with a framework and a process for making future boundary changes. But prior to that, we were being asked to make some changes that we're being told are irreversible, so they could go completely against whatever policy we come up with or propose, and they're not reversible, and therefore I would request that staff give us some short-term options that could be reversible. If we say, gosh, we made this change last year and it just doesn't fit with this new policy and process we came up with, I think that we should have an option to go back. So get through the short-term problem with a short-term fix, and then really focus on the long-term solution and undo some of these things. We might say, gosh, it fits perfectly with our new process, that was the model, we'll keep going. And we might also say it doesn't fit at all, and we need to revisit it. So there should be some mechanism to revisit it. We have to make a short-term change or help PPS decide on a short-term issue. Happy to do that, but it doesn't seem like it should be irreversible.
Michelle?
So I'm okay with trusting Judy that the hotspots are the hotspots, like the super hotspots, but I do want to point out that the utilization for over-enrollment, it doesn't do anything about the hot under-enrollment problems, and that bothers me. The utilization, though, I think we all need to really look at that, and I'm just not trusting it, because, for example, Beverly Cleary is at 94%. and you're telling us it's a
Across
hot
three
spot.
campuses.
I know it's a 3
Right.
campuses, but that they're not crowded within those buildings, I guess. I don't know. So, and Harrison Park, I went to visit,
Mhm.
and it was lovely. It was the nicest school I have ever been in, and it was, had not an inch, and I was in one of, an extremely overcrowded school that got grade reconfigured. So I know what crowded looks like at Wriggler, and it's not Harrison Park. You can all go look for yourself, feel free, or you could just believe me that they're fine. It was a middle school, it was built as a middle school, and it's spacious, and the rooms are big, and they've got a low number of kids in each room, and whatever. So, that's my impression. So this utilization, I'm not so good on. The other thing is, I think we could do these hot spots, but it would feel an awful lot like they were guinea pigs. And they'll know that,
Guinea pig.
I think. They'll know that they're guinea pigs, and they might want it. I mean, James doesn't want it.
We don't want it. We
But
don't.
I'm happy to go talk to them. Like I said, we can't do anything before the enrollment and transfer policy, and we really shouldn't do anything before we get the community surveys back at a large scale. So I'm happy to go talk to them, but I'm not making any, like, we could end up where Scott's saying, which is like, no, we're not doing it.
So we're 11 minutes over. If there are things, you've got sticky notes in front of you, write down anything you want us to know, and our chair, Jason.
I just wanted to add one point, I guess, from my perspective, and this part I'm taking the chair hat off and just trying to be a member really quick, which is, I think through all of this work and actually trying to understand how Beverly Cleary has somehow grappled with the craziness in the last 2 years, what is for me the big indicator is this is the first time that the district has ever done a district-wide process of this kind of magnitude. So we are creating the framework for how future systems will do this. And I want to figure out how you do this right so that we don't create new traumas for future communities. So if that is what we're doing, then I want to make sure that this whole 25 of us, if we're going to be open and all that we have the best chance to do this right the first time. That doesn't put any community versus another re-entrenches traumas that have happened before in various regards.
Okay.
And I want to make sure everyone has the best shot when they cast their vote in any way to feel like they've got the best chance to be armed for that. And so I think for me, I'm very for having staff running some scenarios, whatever, but also it's, to Michelle's point, we don't know where the board will land on the SACIT recommendations, which if they're gonna hit this lottery cycle, they get voted on by early, or I think January 13th. So that's another thing that's gonna directly impact how we do it. And if we do it in a silo of Beverly, Cleary, and Chapman, and then calculate that after, I'm nervous that we're gonna traumatize communities that are already gonna go through one, and it's gonna be a repeat of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been through enough processes where I don't think any of us wanna have that happen again.
And just from a broader process observation, we're at the point now in a formation stage where the fears and the concerns and the red flags are very visible, right? And the tools to manage those, you're not particularly familiar with yet. And I mean, you're all skillful people, and you've all been successful in different areas, right? That's part of why you're here. And the trick is for us as a group is to find a way forward to help us be successful. And maybe we need to, there's a lot of potential ways to address concerns the group share. So we're way over time. So just from our next meeting is December 3rd.
It is.
And we have a subcommittee that wanted to meet about decision making. Matt, Michelle, Kim, and Jason. Email me or Judy if you want to join that group. And then we also have a group of Tony that will work on videotaping meetings and what is the committee's responsibility for responding to input to it. I anticipate both of those groups meeting once.
He already has enough power with this.
Oh,
update.
all right.
I'll counteract it.
All right.
Thanks, Matt.
So, thank you very much. This was the meeting to try and trigger the gag reflex on where the group is, right? And so we got a lot of very valuable feedback. Jason, any last words?
So the one last thing is Judy wanted to have me share with you all is, we know that everyone's got a lot of questions because we just got a huge information dump and didn't have enough time to really wrestle with it. So what Judy will create by some point tomorrow is kind of a Google Doc that everyone can put in their additional questions so we can figure out all of the major questions people still have and build that infrastructure. How do we sequence the next steps out?
So and can I just point out that moving into the next meeting, do I have your permission to schedule it in a community school? If we go in with the assumption that this is not the boundary change committee here to change your boundary, it's a listening session and we're still learning about boundary components, and it'll give people a chance to give you their version of the pluses and minuses. But I feel like we need to take some of the risk out of your work right now, because we want you to have the opportunity to learn in the live moment when decisions are being made, but not put you in an untenable place to make a decision that feels like you're not prepared for, is too permanent, and is outside of the scope of what you really signed up for. So my concern is that you don't want to go to Beverly Cleary in 2 weeks, and I'm going to move you to Beverly Cleary, and it's going to be even more uncomfortable being uncomfortable there. So are you okay with going to Beverly Cleary, having some opportunity for public comment if we're still at a place where you're learning, you're not there as decision makers for their fate?
What are they commenting? And what are they commenting on?
So there's a sizable...
Does it tell us either change the boundary or not?
There's a sizable group who have said, please give us a solution other than the 3 campuses. It's really hard, and we would be open to considering something like blah, 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 blah. And I don't know that we'll have the same thing at Chapman. I believe we would at least have it there. And I think that they would appreciate being heard, and we would appreciate you helping us filter what's being heard, so that if you're not the decision makers and we are, we at least have your take on what you heard, and you're helping us move through what to do about it.
Okay, I went to the Beverly Cleary. I love going to Beverly Cleary. That's where I went to school. I went to the PTA meeting there last week. I know there's Judy and John are going there Monday night for a community listening session, because the community wants to know, you said you come back with a permanent solution in a year, what's the plan? I know the PTA is doing a survey asking about starter school 47th or whatever, moving the boundary. I don't want to meet at Beverly Cleary. I will say that. This is not what I signed up for. To me, the hot spot is the kind of decision we don't want to make in the future, because the hot spot is because this has been building up for 6, 7, 8 years. We want to get to a system where we do this boundary fix, and then there's an ongoing committee that anticipates problems and changes things so we don't get to hot spots.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask you to vote on it right now, and we didn't even set up a protocol for it, and you're a half an hour over, but I appreciate any other comments that people have. Obviously, we've got some work to do to get ready for the next meeting, whether it's going to be here or there. I hope you will come back on December 11th. December 3rd. Oh, yeah, come back on the 11th, too.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Come back on the 11th, but nobody's meeting.
So,
They were promised a solution.